Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. We have a webinar titled 2 Decades of Nuclear Learning in South Asia. And this has been scheduled to discuss how India and Pakistan had fared for the last 23 years, because today is the anniversary of Pakistan's nuclear test, date on which Pakistan formally declared itself nuclear weapons state as a response to India's nuclear test a week earlier. So on May 28, 1998, Pakistan tested 5 nuclear devices, and on May 30th, tested a 6th one. So today's webinar would essentially aim to understand how has been this nuclear learning process in South Asia. It has been more than 2 decades now, both South Asian adversaries, but seems to be moving on to different trajectories. India views itself as a major player in the US-led Indo-Pacific strategy that is aimed at containing China, and is building conventional as well as nuclear capabilities that are viewed by Pakistan as a serious challenge to its security interests, forcing it to take corrective measures for ensuring the credibility of its conventional and nuclear deterrence postures. Based on the respective learning experiences of the last over 2 decades, both India and Pakistan have evolved their nuclear doctrines. India, which had earlier maintained a publicly declared posture of no first use, has indicated a potential shift as it moves towards acquiring a counterforce posture or counterforce first strike capability against Pakistan. In response, Pakistan has introduced what is now known as full spectrum deterrence posture to deter the entire spectrum of threats that is ranging from a limited conflict to an all-out war with India. To understand the nuclear learning processes of both India and Pakistan and forecast their future trajectories, today's webinar would aim to discuss the following key questions. Number one, what are the lessons for both India and Pakistan from the last over 2 decades of nuclear learning? 2, how have nuclear weapons helped in maintaining strategic stability in South Asia? Number 3, what could be the likely impact of emerging technologies on India-Pakistan deterrence relationship? 4th, what are the likely nuclear trajectories of both India and Pakistan? Number 5, what are the prospects of nuclear CBMs in South Asia? To address these questions, we have this wonderful panel of emerging and established scholars that includes Sayyid Ali Zia Jafri, who is an associate editor and who is the first speaker also. So I'll just briefly introduce him and then give mic to him. Sayyid Ali Zia Jafri is the associate editor of Pakistan Politico and research associate at the Center for Security, Strategy and Policy Research, University of Lahore. Ali was a visiting fellow at Stimson Center, Washington, D.C. He regularly writes on strategic issues for national and international publications. His research interests lie in the fields of nuclear deterrence, strategic stability, and geopolitics. He is teaching undergraduate level courses on foreign policy, national security, arms control and disarmament, and non-proliferation since 2018. Ali, you have the floor. Thank you.
Are they happy with the nuclear revolution theory? Or are they, looking at nuclear opportunism, which was recently coined by Mark Bell in his new book, Nuclear Reactions? So we need to look at these things in a very holistic and a very cogent manner. So what have both countries learned? Both countries have learned a great deal about how to manage nuclear weapons. They, at the factual and at the inferential levels, have understood that nuclear weapons have to be managed properly. There has to be a very robust command and control system in place. And they have to, to a varying degrees, have to include a doctrine or a kind of a postulate to outline as to how they want to employ and not employ nuclear weapons, depending on the situation. So they have learned that over the course of the past 2 decades. They have also understood regardless of the imperfections, that nuclear weapons have a role in crises, because with every passing crisis since 1999's Kargil crisis, which perhaps started on the 26th of May 1999, the learning outcomes have changed. After 1999's Kargil crisis, India believed, and it still believes, that nuclear weapons have opened a window for a limited kinetic action below the nuclear umbrella. And that understanding over the years has transformed into its looking at nuclear weapons as weapons of war fighting rather than weapons of deterrence. I say this because of a very simple reason. And I would tie this to how India has been eviscerating and tinkering with its nuclear, with one of the hallmarks of its nuclear doctrine, which is the NFU policy. You talked about it yesterday in great details. I just want to touch upon that and link that with nuclear learning. India believes that it is under a strategic paralysis owing to Pakistan's nuclear weapons, and it believes that Pakistan gets away scot-free because of its so-called nuclear blackmail. So what it wants to do now to extricate itself from that paralysis is that it wants to shift back from NFU to first use with a Pakistan-specific purpose. And if you dovetail that with the temptations and the propensities to go towards counter-force targeting, you will get a very dangerous matrix. The matrix would be this: if you go by the logic of nuclear strategy, you do understand that India here wants to get out of its terrorism riddle and wants to punish Pakistan by tinkering with its nuclear doctrine. So if you are looking at first use against a nuclear armed country like Pakistan, you need to understand one important element. The element is that it would be foolish for any nuclear weapon state to launch a counter value strike while giving the enemy every possible means and ways and justifications as well to retaliate with a counter value of its own, because all of its nuclear arsenal would be intact. So if you link the so-called first use doctrine that India is traveling towards with its counterforce temptations, which are out in the open now. A lot of literature has come out of late, and there's no denying the fact. So we are up against a very, very dangerous country. And the third aspect of learning that I want to focus is more than the kinds and types of learning, and more than the direction of learning, the most important element in this entire spectrum is who learns. So fortunately or unfortunately, deterrence hinges upon what we call rationality. Although we can talk about Schelling's irrationality debate, and I know you do make a mention of it in most of your talks, but that's a separate thing. But the idea here is, let me take you back to 2019. On our side, our leader was saying that we have weapons that can cause annihilation if escalation were to continue at such a breakneck pace. But on the other hand, we had a leadership in India which was fine with threatening to launch missiles and even putting the missiles on high alert because it felt that it can get away. So this feeling of getting away is a bad learning outcome. And this, I don't think, given India's polity and the direction that its leadership has taken with a tinge of religiosity, I don't think this learning outcome could change going forward. If anything, this getting away syndrome is going to have deleterious ramifications on strategic stability going forward. And given the fact that we have a plethora of advanced technologies, disruptive technologies, and cutting edge technologies coming to the play, we do realize that if a country wants to, change the nature of its offense and defense balance, it is obviously trying to undermine deterrence. And it is trying to undermine deterrence because it believes that undermining deterrence perhaps would bring to the table many a political mileage for the regime in India. And even if it does not go on to carry out those initiatives, the impact on an adversary like Pakistan, which even otherwise does not believe in most of what India says, could be huge, because we have never believed in India's NFU. Nobody could believe in a country's NFU because NFU is a declaratory policy. Even that is being questioned now, and it was questioned even in the draft nuclear doctrine of 17th August 1999. So the problem here is that what Rajnath Singh said about the future could be tomorrow, future could be today even. He said that on the 16th of August, so from 17th of August, the future began. So my concern is that the learning outcome that India has taken is that it can evade deterrence while trying not to avoid deterrence. So this is a paradox that we need to deal with. On our end, we have learned a simple thing, and which is a very straightforward affair. We have learned one thing, that we cannot compromise on our deterrent. Come what may, we have to fill the gaps in our deterrent capabilities, wherever and whatever they might be. It could be through the induction of tactical nuclear weapons. It could be through the induction of Shaheen 3. It could be through a QPQ plus response. It could be anything. But the idea is that we cannot attenuate our deterrent at any cost. And for that, we are obviously mired in a action-reaction syndrome, which which depends and derives its direction from India and not Pakistan. We unfortunately have to respond to what India does, and that is something not very healthy for strategic stability. Although at the end, I would like to say that Pakistan has shouldered the burden of strategic stability. Had it not been for Pakistan's responses through learning, strategic stability would have been marred in more ways than one way back in time. Thank you very much. I'll stop here and look forward to having a good Q&A session.
Thank you, Aliza. That was your opening remarks, and I'm sure that would trigger lots of questions, especially from the students who are attending in large number. The next speaker is Mr. Ali Mustafa. He's a lecturer at Department of Strategic Studies, National Defense University, Islamabad. He's a graduate in Non-Proliferation and Terrorism Studies from Middlebury Institute of International Studies, Monterey, California, and Strategic and Nuclear Studies from National Defense University, Islamabad. He has interest in issues of proliferation, arms control, and disarmament on South Asia. Ali Mustafa, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, sir. Dr. Adil, it's great that you have invited me to talk. I just am realizing that it's almost been a decade that you were teaching me around the same time the courses on arms control and disarmament. So it's an honor, sir. Thank you so much for doing that. So the topic that I was given was the role of nuclear weapons in maintaining strategic stability. This would be sort of my general overview without looking into the specifics, and then we can talk about the specifics more in the Q&A session. I mean, when we're talking about role of nuclear weapons in strategic stability, I think depending upon which side of the strategic equilibrium you are, there's been a propensity to either overstate the uses of nuclear weapons and sometimes to understate other aspects as well. So I think it's at the start it's important to clarify. I mean, what is meant by strategic stability? So I really like this Edward Warner's definition, a former U.S. Secretary of Defense, that there's a narrow, a medium, and a wider definition of strategic stability. So in the narrower sense, we can talk about a crisis stability, and we can talk about arms race stability, that is propensity of states to go towards making nuclear forces, or once a crisis happens, how likely are they to use nuclear weapons? If you look at that more broadly, we can talk about strategic stability, that is the absence of outstanding disputes and conflicts between nuclear armed rivals. And finally, when you're talking about the broadest sense of strategic stability, in an ideal world, you don't want there to be any regional animosity, and the region can benefit out of that. So if you break down strategic stability from its components, we can look at strategic stability from the lens of deterrence stability, arms race stability, crisis stability, and more so in the broadest sense, political stability. So when it comes to the first component of strategic stability, deterrence stability, I think that is where nuclear weapons have played the greatest role. I mean, at least the anecdotal evidence suggests certainly that the presence of nuclear weapons has averted crisis turning into wars, whether it was Kargil, whether it was the parliament attack, whether it was Mumbai, and whether it was the most recent Pulwama and the post actions that happened towards that. And even pre-nuclear nuclearization of South Asia, we can always talk about evidence to suggest that even in the brass tacks conflict, perhaps the mention of the presence of nuclear weapons had played a deterrent role as well. To what extent, to what degree? I mean, then again, that is debatable. Though when we're talking about that there's been deterrent stability due to the presence of nuclear weapons, I agree with Ali's point before that there's been attempts by either sides to actually find spaces below that, and we'll talk about how there has been attempts by more so by India, that below the nuclear threshold they either want to exploit or create new avenues where they can let off steam and win political points. We'll talk about that as I go along, and we can talk about that more in the Q&A session as well. When it comes to crisis stability, I think yes, nuclear weapons have played a role, but we haven't seen leaders on either side being compelled to think about a nuclear option to begin with. I think there've been many other tools at the leaders' disposal, whether it was Kargil, whether it was a Twin Peak crisis, Mumbai, or Pulwama. There were just so many tools at the decision makers, that they did not want to bring it towards the nuclear level, yet keeping it below the nuclear threshold, yet having enough toys to get political points across. And I think that is something unlike the Cold War rivalry. If you make analogy with that, with US and Soviet Union, there was no territorial dispute, there was no heavily militarized border, there was not as much reliance on conventional capability to win political points than it was on the nuclear level. So I think that is something more so with the South Asian example, and I think that's why yes, in the most recent crisis of Pulwama, we've heard Modi saying Qatal ki Raat, and us responding to that, we have a ratio of 3-1 to respond to that. But then again, the leaders have not been forced, I believe, to use the nuclear option. Also, when you talk about crisis stability, even when you talk about the role of third-party mediation to de-escalate the situation, I think that is also due to the presence of nuclear weapons that major powers have invested so much of time and effort, because a nuclear war would not be in their interest. So I think that is true. The crisis stability aspect of has also been true. There is to a great extent crisis stability, then we perceive it to be Though the likelihood of crisis happening and the interim measures to stop crisis from taking place, those are not there. But I talk more about that when we come to the end of it. When it comes to arms race stability, then again, unlike Cold War, there's not been a tit for tat kind of a response by either side. There's been more of a proportional response by Pakistan being the as compared to India, on the back foot. So I think there is an arms race stability to some extent, but then again, you have to think of arms race stability in a broader manner as well. Yes, the nuclearization has not happened as it was during the Cold War, but there's been a great reliance on conventional weapon, conventional modernization, and what Ali was pointing out towards that, because of the lessons that we perceive India has learned from the past 2 decades, we have to deter India at all levels, and be that levels below the nuclear threshold or above that. And that's why there's been not as much reliance on building really more nuclear weapons. I think still the estimate of the open source estimate of Pakistani expansion of nuclear arsenal is not much. But there's been more reliance, and that has happened more in the last decade, that there's been a focus more towards plugging the gaps below the nuclear threshold, which have relied more upon non-nuclear options than the nuclear options. When it comes to political stability, I think this is by far where nuclear weapons have not played a role to the extent that could have been done. India went ahead with abrogation of 35A and 370. India took actions post Pulwama. Lawfare has been used against Pakistan. So there's been a great attempt by India, at least, to change the political status quo. If anything, the last attempt by Pakistan could be perhaps attributed to then again, that is just debatable, to the episode in Kargil. But from the Pakistani side, there's not been much effort to change the political status quo. But especially with the Modi regime, there's been more emphasis towards trying to change the political status quo. Whether you want to talk about the use of sub-conventional actors, the use of terrorism, there's been that as well. But there's been a great attempt by India to change the political status quo, and that has happened even with the nuclear overhang. So I think that is where nuclear weapons have not played a role as well. I think there are other elements at play which have focused, focused more towards deterrence and compellence, and that has been the conventional deterrence aspect of it. Yes, conflicts did not go towards the nuclear level, to the conventional warfare level, because of the presence of nuclear weapons. However, there were still not many limited conflicts between India and Pakistan below the nuclear overhang as well. And I think that is attributed more towards the conventional relative asymmetry, the qualitative asymmetry between India and Pakistan. Yes, India has a larger force in Pakistan, and their modernization is happening at a rapid pace, but still that is not enough that Pakistan even a limited conflict would suffer by any stretch of imagination, something that would humiliate Pakistan and would score brownie points for India. But having said that, I think there will be a propensity by India to exploit spaces, to either create spaces or to make find new avenues towards that direction. I think Pulwama was an example of that to a great extent. It has to be seen that how Pakistan would respond in future conflicts, and realizing the modernization that that is taking place in India. But I think that along with nuclear deterrence, conventional deterrence cannot be understated in this conflict, with the peculiar nature of challenges that exist on either sides. So nuclear weapons have certainly kept strategic deterrence. Other elements of deterrence have, we can debate about them. I think to conclude, have nuclear weapons led to strategic stability? Narrowly, in the sense of crisis stability and deterrence stability, absolutely. It has, in the broader sense, has it reduced the proliferation of armaments in South Asia, that is debatable, but with more reliance on conventional deterrence along with nuclear deterrence to plug the deterrence gap, I think no. We've had arms race instability on the conventional level. Has it led to nuclear weapons led to reduction of armed conflicts? It has led to a reduction of hostility to a certain extent, but it has not led to solving the underlying issues. So I think on the political stability lens, I think that has been the place where the leadership on either side has not realized the potential. I think then again, nuclear weapons give you certainly some things, but it doesn't give you everything, right? So where it has stopped conventional wars from taking place, but then again, nuclear weapons are not the absolute solution to all of the strategic quagmire. In defense of nuclear weapons do so much, but it only gives you time so that the leaders can realize and solve their outstanding disputes. I think that is what is lacking in South Asia, and what little hope there was in the previous regimes in India, I think that hope has certainly shifted much more towards the pessimistic side with the coming of Modi and with the actions that we have been seeing. I think considering the political instability part, India would keep on doing things to escalate the situation. We would likely see an Israeli kind of colonial settler policies in Kashmir, and it has to be seen that to what extent will that change the political geography of South Asia, but then that would certainly escalate the situation in South Asia. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali Mustafa, and thank you for bringing out this point that nuclear weapons are not a panacea for all kind of problems, because the general perception amongst the public at times it is that we have nuclear weapons and probably they are going to solve all problems. So I'm sure your presentation will also generate some interesting thoughts from the participants. I'm still looking for Q&A window. Please start typing if some of you have questions so that you are taken on first come first basis. The next speaker is Ms. Amna Rafiq. She's working as a research associate at the Arms Control and Disarmament Center at the Institute of Strategic Studies, Islamabad. Previously, she has worked with Arms Control and Disarmament Affairs Directorate of the Strategic Plans Division and Pakistan Institute of Parliamentary Services, Islamabad. As a young parliamentary subject expert, she also assisted the Senate's Standing Committee on Defense Production at the Parliament of Pakistan. Ms. Rafiq holds an MPhil degree in International Relations from Quaid-e-Azam University, Islamabad. She has completed her BS Honours Politics and International Relations from International Islamic University, Islamabad with gold medal, distinction, and first position. Her fields of interest include cyberspace, emerging technologies, arms control, and disarmament. Ms. Amna, your turn, please. Ms. Amna, you need to unmute.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Adil, for this opportunity and plus taking this initiative of bringing together a panel of young speakers, and happy to appear to all of you. First of all, I will start with a disclaimer that all the views and opinions expressed in this presentation are strictly my own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy and position of ACDC and ISSI. So topic on which I'm going to speak for the next 10 minutes is the impact of emerging technologies on strategic stability in South Asia. So here's the sequence of my presentation. First, I will talk about the basic concept of the emerging technologies because every day we see a technological innovation, but every technology is not an emerging technology. So in order to qualify as an emerging technology, a technology must possess a certain set of characteristics. So I will highlight those key features as well. Then secondly, I will talk about the tendencies of these emerging technologies in South Asia. In the third section, I will analyze the impact of these emerging technologies on the strategic stabilities in South Asia. And I will end my presentation with the options for Pakistan. So starting with the basic question, what exactly does emerging technology mean? So emerging technologies, a set of radically developing, coherent and novel technologies with the ability to produce prominent effects. These technologies not only have the potential to alter the institutional frameworks and set of stakeholders, but also the nature of interactions among them. So the true potential of their impact remains ambiguous due to their manifestation in the near future. So from this description, we can identify 7 key characteristics which a technology must possess in order to qualify as an emerging technology. It is a radical development, coherence, novelty, prominent effects, and ability to alter the institutional frameworks and set of stakeholders, and ambiguity. And the last characteristic is the manifestation of their consequences or impacts in the near future. So in light of the literature produced by the United Nations and the US Congressional Research Service, I have enlisted these 10 technologies as an emerging technologies. Emerging technologies include robotics, drones, artificial intelligence, we have quantum technology, electromagnetic directed energy weapons, biotechnology, missile technologies, especially hypersonics, cyber and information and communication technologies. We have advanced outer space technologies, advanced chemicals and material technologies. So in case of South Asia, I will mainly focus on robotics, drones, AI, and the hypersonics, cyber and outer space technologies. So talking about the impact of these technologies on strategic stabilities, South Asia is no exception when it comes to the complexity and the ambiguity, the uncertainty which surrounds emerging technologies. So understanding the interdependence and patterns of interaction among strategic stability and emerging technologies is a complex process. So it is difficult to, if not impossible to predict how and when the consolidation of these technologies will take place in South Asia, but it is quite clear that it is not going to be a smooth sailing for Pakistan especially. The militarization of these technologies will further add to the security complexities of the region. So as Mr. Ali Mustafa already described the strategic stability, which is basically a stable deterrence relation in which neither party perceives or have an advantage of altering its force posture due to the fear that an opponent might use weapons first during the crisis. So again, there are 3 main elements of the strategic stability, which are arms race stability, crisis stability, and deterrence stability. So first, with the rapid Indian military modernization and investment, and international collaboration for emerging technologies like hypersonics and DMDs and drones, lethal autonomous weapon system, the future of arms race stability is not that much bright in South Asia. And in my assessment, introduction of these technologies will undermine the arms race stability in South Asia, and this could push Pakistan to invest in these technologies as well. So in addition to the development of lethal autonomous weapon system, the integration of AI with existing weapon system, especially the nuclear command and control, is another concern. Especially it is really important to define the contours of human-machine interaction and different levels of human control. Secondly, the AI-based space platforms, autonomous weapons and drones forming could be extremely vulnerable to the variety of these cyber threats, especially in the South Asian context, such as hacking, takeover, reprogramming, or jamming. So it would be difficult to assess the autonomous weapons are operating as programmed by the state, or they are operating without any interference. We should also take into account the electromagnetic interference by a third party or a spoiler may produce conflicting results, thereby leading to an unforeseen complexity, especially when it is difficult to prove any type of intrusion. Moving on to the future of the sea-based deterrence, currently it is difficult, if not impossible, to detect submarines. So, however, AI-enabled naval ships and submarines would be able to detect the nuclear submarines with better speed and accuracy, although this technology will take some time to mature in South Asia. But its consolidation would have a destabilizing effect on credible second strike capability. So when AI and hypersonics will enter the South Asian conventional battlefield, both countries, India and Pakistan, would be fighting at machine speed. And moving on to the concept of the limited war, I agree with what Ali Jafri earlier said about the limited war and feeling of getting away in Indian leadership. The plus point or the core point of the emerging technology is the fast speed. The belief of destroying an enemy at machine speeds will create a sense of superiority in India, which can result in a preemptive strike. We can clearly see this false sense of superiority and confidence of escalation control in India. And Indian Army Chief last year gave a statement in which he said, and I quote, "The Balakot airstrike saw these short, intense escalatory cycles of military activity in full media glare, where sophisticated information narratives played an equally important role." So if you play the escalatory game with skill, military ascendancy can be established in short cycles of conflict that do not necessarily lead to war. And talking about the role of technologies in this concept of the limited warfare, he said that technology is also tipping doctrinal cycles, as doctrines are now chasing the technology. So this is an important point. This statement highlights the significance of the information warfare, the impact of emerging technologies on doctrinal shifts in India, and also the false sense of superiority and using the propaganda, deepfakes, and fake news to construct a suitable narrative. So this brings us to the important question, as well as the last section of my presentation, that what are the options for Pakistan? Despite a strong stance of a ban on the militarization and weaponization of emerging technologies, Pakistan cannot restrict other states, especially India, from the militarization of emerging technologies and their inclusion in force posture, defense strategies, and doctrines. Therefore, in my assessment, Pakistan should reconsider the current stance on the militarization of emerging technologies, especially the autonomous weapon systems. Plus, Pakistan should search for the smart solution, how emerging tech can enhance its military preparedness. And plus, Pakistan should also explore the public-private partnership, as private sector can help a lot in the consolidation of these emerging technologies in Pakistan. And then lastly, we have a very traditional option of forming or allying with China and friendly countries. So that's all from my side. Thank you so much for your interest and attention. I would now be interested to hear from the audience their thoughts and questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amna. Interesting presentation. I have some questions, but I'm sure the audience will also have some of the questions. So with this, we move to our last panelist, Ms. Sitara Noor. She's a senior researcher at the Center for Aerospace and Security Studies, Islamabad. Previously, Ms. Sitara was a research fellow at Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation, that is located in Vienna, Austria, from 2016 to 2017. Prior to joining the Vienna Center, she worked at the Pakistan Nuclear Regulatory Authority as an international relations analyst. She has served as a faculty member at the National University of Modern Languages for 2 years. She was also a visiting faculty at the National University of Science and Technology, the Foreign Services Academy of Pakistan, and the Information Services Academy of Pakistan. She was also a South Asian Voices visiting fellow from 2019 to 2020 at the Stimson Center, Washington, D.C. Ms. Noor, floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Dr. Adil. Thank you very much for organizing this session. And I really enjoyed the discussion that had taken place earlier. And I think it sets the tone very rightly, appropriately for what I'm going to state in terms of how to try, states should try and have been trying to reduce the risks through some confidence building measures. So the Pulwama-Balakot crisis of 2019 has reinstated the fragility of peace and risk of an inadvertent crisis in South Asia as a result of miscalculations specifically. The bilateral relation has been at their lowest for the past many years, but 2019 was significant in terms of scale of hostilities and potential risks, as both nuclear neighbors engaged in an air skirmish against one another for the first time since 1971. The crisis de-escalated, but highlighted the persistent need to put in place some risk reduction measures to avoid and manage future crises in a better manner. With the onset of the third nuclear age, and particularly here, I would like to refer back to some of the challenges that Amna had highlighted, which are hallmark of the third nuclear age on the global stage. South Asia has all the reason to be concerned as the region faces stark challenge of ensuring its security and stability in view of destabilizing security dynamics. The recent announcement of unconditional reaffirmation of the 2003 ceasefire agreement in a joint statement by the DGMO on February 25 this year has raised hopes for a much awaited thaw in otherwise very tense relations. The formal dialogue process has remained stalled for many years, as New Delhi had shown complete disinterest in any engagement with Islamabad over alleged terrorism charges against Islamabad. And this had somewhat brought in CBM fatigue on Pakistani side as well. And following India's August 5th decision, Pakistan too had put the condition of reversal of India's illegal action in Jammu and Kashmir for any future dialogue process to take place. However, if we note that the announcement of the ceasefire agreement, neither side had made any reference to those respective conditions. However, the subsequent statements have reinstated the original positions and the conditions to go forward for any peace process. But these exchanges of letters, both countries had also resumed talks on Indus water, and there were talks of starting off the cricket match, etc. So that shows some indication of positivity overall. And this also indicates that the back channel process is underway. And if these trends continue, one can hope that India and Pakistan might be on the verge of another rapprochement. But here is the challenge: how to square the circle and how to make the CBM process bring its role in sustaining the stability. While the recent developments offer an opportunity to deal with the emerging challenges of the third nuclear age, this opportunity is not free from uncertainty, as the skepticism over CBM process persists. Historically, CBMs have played an important role in bringing the two countries closer, increasing people-to-people contact, reducing risks, and doing the requisite job of boosting confidence. But they have always fallen short of reaching the next logical step, that is, creating an environment for conflict resolution. The CBMs, however, have a shelf life, and if they are not supplemented by some concrete steps to resolve the primary conflict, they will wither away at the very site of the next crisis, as they always did in South Asia. Therefore, this fresh round of cordiality will only be useful if both India and Pakistan put in that extra effort to institutionalize the CBM process and get down to resolving the core issues, or at least begin to address them seriously. Additionally, the current change, another challenge that I see, that the current change appears to be driven more by the external pressure rather than an internal consensus to achieve peace through dialogue. There are unconfirmed reports of a third country's involvement in brokering this new amelioration process in South Asia. While any peace effort should be welcomed, it must be accompanied by a mutual desire for peace. In this process, however, at the very outset, it is obvious that the both states are not looking at the same end result. The BJP leadership, as already alluded Mustafa made a very important point that how the states are involved in this process. So the BJP's leadership's entire political movement has been based on an entire Pakistan narrative. And to date, they have not shown any change of heart and mind. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has neither the desire for compromise nor the urgency to resolve the Kashmir issue. The only apparent objective to find a way to deflect international focus from India's human rights violation in Kashmir and suppressive measures against minorities in India. The Biden administration has also shared their concern over Indian actions and most likely has also advised the Indian leadership to extricate themselves from the Western Front to be able to focus more on China. So this new engagement process will provide a necessary breather to the BJP leadership and allow them to appear as a government striving for regional peace. Pakistan at its end wishes to see some development as a result of its Kashmir diplomacy. But it's important to note that in the absence of a genuine desire to resolve the Kashmir issue from the Indian side, Pakistan is to lose more if it engages in this process. To get some positive results out of any engagement process, both countries need to have equal stake in the outcome without getting India to take substantive action to bring some relief to Kashmiri people and create a conducive environment for talks. Any such engagement is unlikely to sustain for long. But as I mentioned in the beginning as well, that there are risks of inadvertent crises. There are risks of inadvertent escalation, potential of inadvertent escalation. And there are many reports that also suggest that if India and Pakistan continue on the same pattern, there might be reversal of such hostility, and probably it might not find such off-ramps as we had in 2019, which would allow some peaceful outcome or not a very serious outcome, challenging outcome. So it is important to keep finding space for peace. And as I keep thinking about myself as an incorrigible optimist, I keep looking at opportunities here and there where countries actually can engage and find some respite in the current tensions that we have right now. So the recent watches indicate that there is some realization otherwise as well, that the nuclear environment would lead to mutual annihilation. At least this realization does exist on the both sides. So despite the aforementioned concerns over the durability of CBM process, it is important that India and Pakistan must find ways to insulate fragile regional stability from emerging challenges and engage on the issues that may lead to inadvertent war. There are various templates to the 1999 engagement in form of the Lahore Agreement that offered range of measures for people-to-people contact and security, mutual security and other things. But while a similar environment for wide-ranging engagement is missing at the moment, as I mentioned earlier, the threat of mutually assured destruction may provide an impetus to at least find ways for some risk reduction measures to manage crises. Therefore, notwithstanding the existing caveats, both countries should use this emerging opportunity to reduce the challenges of the third nuclear age. And in that regard, I think first and foremost would be to solidify. If I quickly go down on some of the examples of this kind of CBMs I have in my mind, and I'll leave the rest to the question and answer sessions. First and foremost, it is important to solidify the existing gains in an incremental manner. For instance, the recent reaffirmation of 2003 ceasefire agreement is significant, but it is not sacrosanct, as we have already seen some of the violations already. So it is important that they may begin by formalizing the 2003 agreement and commit to completely stop firing and shelling across the LOC. And in order to reduce nuclear risks or inadvertent escalation, it is necessary to bring clarity in respective nuclear policy and postures, particularly as Ali also very eloquently mentioned that Pakistan didn't believe in India's NFU. And after some talks of some debates, emerging debates on the India's first use posture, that whatever little confidence that exists, if at all, that had vanished. So there is clearly need from Indian side, particularly to avoid that new risk of entanglement of nuclear and non-nuclear weapons and confusion on policies because of India's recent, counter-force temptation, if we may call them, if we may use for a better terminology. So communication would also be a key. as we have seen that the communication does exist, communication lines were there, but they probably were not used when they were actually needed the most. There were interesting debate earlier on the common language of nuclear deterrence. Dr. Adil was part of that discussion. I find that really, really relevant, and particularly because most of the terminology is borrowed from the Cold War, and not everything applies the way it was being applied in the Cold War model. So it is very, very important that South Asia has its own lexicon where we clearly understand, clearly, communicate on each side what points we are talking to. And then some of the nuclear CBMs that already are in practice, for example, the prohibition on attack against nuclear installations, the pre-notification of missile test, they can be further strengthened and expanded by adding more commitments within that framework. For instance, not just the nuclear installations, but some other critical infrastructures, for example, command and control structures and other things. So these are some of the quick, I have a really long list of recommendations that can probably be discussed and debated, but I'll just broadly cover these 4 areas and would look forward to any questions and concerns or debates that comes from the audience. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Dr. Adil.
Thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. I know the kind of work you have done on CBMs, and you have a complete list of CBMs or innovative ideas that could be considered. And that was one of the main purpose of bringing in fresh perspective or to generate that kind of debate. Before we move on to question and answer session, we have a very senior colleague as a guest who was in the attendees. He was working in the KRL once nuclear test happened, and so he was part of the whole process. So he was in the mainstream at that time. So I just requested him, today is a very appropriate day to share his views about how was the feeling in 1998? What were the feelings once Pakistan went nuclear? Dr. Zafar Qureshi, he is Dean Graduate Studies at the Air University, my colleague over there. We continue to learn from him. And I thought it would be useful to have his views for 5 minutes about that 1998 episode. Dr. Zafar Qureshi.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saab. Thank you very much to Dr. Adil Sultan. I'm most grateful to you, sir, for giving me this opportunity. MashaAllah, such brilliant youngsters. And, when we all work, we work for the future of our country, for our children. And I'm so happy to hear all of them talk. I'm very encouraged. And inshallah, I hope that their country, their generation, which we hand over to them, will be much better and much stronger than ours. But anyway, you asked me to share my views. I remember today, 23 years ago, I was with Dr. Abdul Qadir Khan and Dr. Hashmi. Although I was grade 19, I was just 41 years old. And Dr. Hashmi phoned me, he said, Zafar, jaldi se idhar aao. So main gaya, so he said कि अभी India ने explosion कर दिया, 11 तारीख थी, I think it was 11th of May. He said, तुम तैयार हो? So I said, sir, हमने तो कभी सोचा भी नहीं था कि we will do all this. And I think 1 or 2 days later, President called Dr. A.Q. Khan. Are you ready? And he called Dr. Ashfaq also, Atomic Energy Commission and KRL. And we didn't have one graphite wire. Graphite wire is about 10 kilometers long. Anyway, but our feelings were that of a lot of excitement. And as these youngsters, I want to tell them 1 or 2 very important things. Number one, our weapons program was shared by Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission and by Dr. A.Q. Khan Research Labs. I was first in atomic energy for a year as a youngster, and then I was about 12 years with Dr. A.Q. Khan Research Lab, where we enriched uranium, and we were successful in the centrifuge program. And in those days, we used to produce only 4 grams per hour. And to take a nuclear weapon, you need more than 20 kilograms. So in those days, we could barely make 1. And I remember a horrible earthquake came and thousands of our centrifuges were destroyed because, a centrifuge goes round 1150 times in 1 second. And it's our technology, I always say कि जो मुल्क सुई नहीं बना सकता, उसने nuclear bomb बना दिया. So this is our crown on yourselves, you youngsters, that you are members of a nuclear weapon state, which is not a small achievement. So you should be very proud of it. And we were very proud of it. And because of that, our country got saved. And then on the 28th and 30th of May, Pakistan detonated 5 first and 1 later, because India detonated total of 5. So we detonated 6. And 1 was a main uranium one were boosted devices. And you know much better than me that this is a very modern age, and you just spoke on new technologies and all. But I would just like to say that you must always keep the nuclear weapons thing. I'm not a strategist, as Dr. Saab speaks so nicely about strategy and first use and second use. And, you know, I don't know all that terminology. But as a scientist, as an engineer, I was a child when I saw 16th of December, 1971, when our army surrendered. And we all cried that day. And I, as a child, promised myself that whatever I can do for my country, I will make a nuclear bomb for it one day. I did BS, MS, PhD in nuclear engineering. I worked, and I have a little contribution in Pakistan's nuclear weapon also, of which I am proud to this day. So our feelings, as Dr. Saab said, say a little bit about your feelings. We were, Dr. Saab, on the skies, all of us. And we saw Pakistan become the 7th nuclear power on this earth. And I am a member of so many organizations, including the American Nuclear Society. And a year or two after, when I went to present my paper in America, the chairman of the US Nuclear Regulatory Commission was sitting there. And my talk was on nuclear things, and the Indian DG was there. The Japanese chairman was sitting in our hall. And they were all fascinated with us. Because, you know, India could not enrich technology by the centrifuge. America failed for many decades in this. They do gaseous diffusion. So I don't want to make it very long. I'm a technical person, but Dr. Saab, we felt very elated. And mashallah, our country is very strong. I don't know how many we have, but maybe 200-300, maybe more. We have missiles, rockets, nuclear weapons. So I would, the reason I came here whenever I go to talk to youngsters is that, remember, your country is a very strong country, very powerful country. And you saw last month what the Israelis did with the Palestinians. So it's not a good thing. And I hope nobody ever thinks that they can do anything like this with Pakistan. 2 years ago, India tried. And why did they go back? Why did they run away? Think about it. Only one reason, because the damage they can get is unthinkable. So I'm sorry if I've taken too much time, but this is what I wanted to say to all of you youngsters. You are our children, and we did all this for you, and you must never, ever finish it. So you must go ahead. You know, in nuclear technology, there is a shelf life of nuclear weapons. It is 3 to 5 years. One nuclear weapon is not usable for 20 years. You have to keep cleaning its surface with nitric acid. You have to make it shine. And especially the plutonium weapons they decay into useless isotopes. So the worst thing for Pakistan would be to think that you don't need nuclear weapons. And whoever thinks that you don't need nuclear weapons, please never agree with them. And so this is, Dr. Saab, my feeling of what I shared with them. Thank you, sir.
So thank you very much for your remarks and for your expose of how the things were in 1998. And I also remember that once we started learning what strategy is, we had to start from scratch, or there were very few people who were dealing with nuclear issues in terms of strategy. But I'm so happy to see there's an entire generation now, the youngsters who have taken over, and they can think from their own minds, and they can express themselves. And that's what is required. And that is one of the purpose of today's webinar also, to bring up these new ideas from this emerging generation of scholars. So now we move to question answer session. The first question is from Ms. Sara Nazir. And she's doing a MS degree in strategic studies from Mary University, Islamabad. Of course, my student, but not given a preference. She was the first to ask a question. Her question is to Ms. Amna Rafiq, that as shown in history that human-developed emerging technologies can alter the nature of warfare. The technologies that you have mentioned are really capable of changing the nature of warfare in South Asia. If yes, then how? So this is one. So I'll call up a second question also, which is from an anonymous attendee. So anybody can take that. How secure are our nuclear weapons in terms of their cyber security? Has there been any cyber attacks from any adversary, for example, India, Israel, or United States? So there are two questions that I'm posing. At first, Ms. Amna, if you want to start.
So regarding, I will start with the last question, that how secure are nuclear weapons in terms of the cyber security. I guess as a part of a think tank or a researcher, I don't think so any of us would be in a position to comment on that. But as far as we understand that Pakistan, the nuclear weapons of Pakistan are extremely secure against any type of threats, including the cyber attacks. So I think it is difficult to comment that there would be any type of these cyber attacks from any type of adversaries against Pakistan. Regarding the role of the technologies on the nature of the warfare, I have already explained in detail how this will affect the nature of warfare, especially the concept of the limited warfare below the nuclear threshold. There is another aspect which I guess Dr. Adil also remembered. There is a concept of the cross-domain deterrence when it comes to the emerging technologies, and plus the emergence or re-emergence of the hybrid warfare, or where possibly India could use these different type of the technologies in different domains, and then it is also possible to escalate or the conflict vertically, and before it crosses a threshold in that particular domain, it could be shifted to another domain. And there is also an example of in Middle East, like when Iran shot down the drone of the United States as a retaliatory strike. US targeted the missile systems of the Iran with the cyber attack. So this could be a one possibility in case of the South Asia. But as I said, that emerging technologies, especially the consequences or the applications of the emerging technologies, are still very much ambiguous. So in the 5 or 10 years time, we will be in a clear position to say that whether this will happen in South Asia as well or not. But yes, there are a lot of combinations, a lot of innovative ways to mix these technologies. It depends on the mission or the objective which a country want to achieve. So that's all from my side.
Okay. Maybe Ms. Sitara, Ali Mustafa or Ali Jafri, if you want to add to this question of cybersecurity, how secure is our nuclear command and control from cyber attacks?
Okay, if I quickly share my perspective on the security part, cybersecurity, you see, one cannot say conclusively that 100% guarantee does exist, that it's free. It's an ongoing process. It's an ongoing learning, and which every nuclear weapon states responsibly reacts to any such situation. And there one way of looking at, and particularly on the weapon side, of course, information remains classified, but one way of looking how a country's cybersecurity system works is to look at what are the ways and methods that they have employed in their civilian sector. So Pakistan's nuclear security on the civilian side has always been has received positive responses in all sorts of IAEA standards and guides and regulations that are there from the IAEA side. And Pakistan actually adheres to all kind of, you may say, regulations that are there in place for the cybersecurity particularly. So that's one way of looking at it. If Pakistan's civilian program is that secure, certainly there are multiple more measures that are in place on the military side. And I also keep saying that it also depends on the cyber on the nuclear security culture of a country. And when the rest of the world woke up to this nuclear security aspect after 9/11, essentially, Pakistan had been conscious of this nuclear security aspect way before, because we were running a covert nuclear program, and we were very conscious of the risks of sabotage. We were very conscious of the risk of destruction of our nuclear program by the external powers. So Pakistan was very much conscious of all these elements that rest of the world has rather woken up late, I would say. So that security culture has ingrained in the nuclear security establishment in Pakistan, and that certainly has not gone away because our threats have evolved. Threats have become multiple, from the state actors to the non-state actors. So there are layers of security that are in place, and cyber is one element that Pakistan takes very, very seriously. So that's a rather vague answer, but I think there are inferences that we can make, because you would not find any concrete answers for any state for that matter. So I may say Pakistan's nuclear security, be it cyber or otherwise, is as good as any other country holding them. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Alicia, do you want to add something?
Yes, I do have a couple of points on
go ahead.
The question. I think, firstly, it is important to understand that technology in and of itself may not do the trick. It is what do states want to do with technology. It all boils down to that. So are you inducting technology in the mix to achieve certain political ends and strategic ends? Or is technology driving your thinking towards going that strategic route? So I think, given that we all understand what India is up to and what it wants to achieve in shape of, tinkering with the status quo, I think the presence of disruptive technologies could fundamentally alter the conduct of war. If I say it could alter the nature of war, then we could get into a very discursive debate, which could take another session or so. But here is that. And the other thing, taking cue from what Sitara said, I think there are many reasons for Pakistan to be ahead of the curve. They emanate from, as Sitara rightly pointed out, Pakistan's security culture and also the overall strategic culture of Pakistan. The other thing is Pakistan has received a lot of flack, unfortunately, and for all the wrong and for all the bad reasons. So Pakistan has been very circumspect about improving itself in the security domain, about enhancing and bolstering its security systems. Having said that, there is no such thing as full security. It is a myth. But Pakistan constantly is on the lookout for plugging gaps in its security architecture, so that nuclear weapons, deterrence cannot work without survivability. If your weapons are not survivable, your deterrent is compromised to a greater degree. So Pakistan, and as Amna rightly pointed out, we as researchers cannot and probably should not be privy to the details of nuclear security, or how secure our weapons are, because that is a domain that that officials should deal with, and they're dealing with in detail. So I think it is only logical to understand that Pakistan would leave no stone unturned to carry out a threat analysis daily. Dr. Adil, you have been in the mix. You would vouch that this is a process that happens not even daily, it happens on an hourly basis. So this is what I have to say for these two questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, I was part of the organization which is responsible for, but what Ms. Sitara and you said, I think that's adequate responses to that. I agree, because of the vulnerabilities, because of our peculiar situation, it was a compulsion to take these security measures to safeguard our nuclear assets, both civilian and the military. So I think you rightly said that we were ahead of curve while others were still thinking, because they were not exposed to that kind of threats, the type of threats that Pakistan was facing. So out of that compulsion, Pakistan took some preemptive measures or proactive measures, and we institutionalize those measures. We have a Pakistan Center of Excellence on Nuclear Security, a complete academy, which gives training to specialized people on different aspects that also include cybersecurity. So I'll just leave it to there. Next, move to the question answer session. Questions remaining. The list is growing, so I'll quickly read, and I'll request that if we can be brief on that. And what I'll do is I read 3 or 4 questions, and each one of I'll request you people to take one of those questions and respond briefly. So first is about the drones. Ms. Amna, maybe if you would like to address that. Now, United States and India has this basic exchange cooperation agreement, because of which the data out of US satellites could be available to India, and India is also renting out drones and in the process of buying Predators from United States. So how will it impact on military plans and operations of Pakistan? So that is question to you. Second is by Behrouz Malik. He talks about that Pakistan initially lacked the nuclear triad for years in terms of naval capability, but recently Pakistan has tested submarine-launched cruise missile. In light of the naval nuclear capability limited to 1 missile, how you think it affects the arms race in South Asia? Having a destabilized equilibrium, what effects it leaves on Pakistan's economy? Maybe Ali Mustafa, you can take this question. And third is about on the Balakot effect by Rose again, but let me give opportunity to somebody else also. So this question is from Malik Kashif to Mr. Ali Zia Jafri. Do you agree that in Balakot misadventures, nuclear deterrence failed to deter the Indian aggression? And I think if you can respond to this, then we'll move to the next set of questions. Ms. Sitara Noor, you can take this question from Behrouz Malik, that India is a big nation, but Pakistan isn't. The skirmishes like Balakot affected Pakistan vigorously, as it is difficult to absorb the aftershocks for a small state like us, and it's easy for India to resist, with the aftermaths having a huge economy. What measures are required to mitigate the chances of such incidents in the region, and how Pakistan can come across a credible threat of the nuclear threshold? So each one of you have one question each. So we start from maybe Ali Mustafa first.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saab. So the question of nuclear triad and submarine-launched cruise missiles or submarine-launched ballistic missiles, I think they come under a series of weapons known as the good weapons, which have a stabilizing effect in terms of a short second strike capability. So I think even if you have one good, survivable system, depending upon if that's been communicated to the other side, and depending upon what the rival thinks is important enough, that can have ample deterrence effect. So I think, yes, it's just one system, but I think even other aspects of Pakistani nuclear arsenal, there will be an element of survivability to them as well, whether it is movable, survivable missile systems, surface-to-surface missile systems, or survivable air system. I think that would have enough impact against India. Now it is yet to be seen how far how quickly Pakistan operationalizes the sea-based deterrent. Thus far, the Babur 3 cruise missile test has only been it's just been tested. It hasn't been incorporated as part of Pakistan's nuclear arsenal. It has yet to be seen how it will be incorporated and what would be the force formation like. But I think any aspect of survivable capability, even if it is less, will have enough impact to cause unacceptable damage to the Indian side. And be that as it may, it may be enough to have the strategic deterrent impact that a country so requires. So I think that's about it on the submarine launch cruise missile test.
So who wants to go next? Ms. Sitara? Okay. And then Alicia, and then Amna Rafiq.
So you see, Behrouz, if I just unpack your question that which starts with that India is a big nation but Pakistan isn't, I think the answer partially lies within that statement that yes, this is true. India has a large conventional army. Pakistan doesn't have as big an army to match Indian conventional force. And this is where the role of nuclear weapon comes. And this is primarily the reason Pakistan had to go on to the nuclear route. And the skirmishes like Balakot, you see, that is why the skirmishes like Balakot has affected both countries equally. That is why the country like India, despite having a large conventional army, could not really go to the second round because the deterrence worked. And I think that partially goes into the question posed to Ali as well, and Ali would elaborate a little more on that. But I think this is precisely how nuclear weapons work. And this is precisely the rationale and objective of having the nuclear weapons, because otherwise a conventional encounter would have affected Pakistan really, really badly had there not been the nuclear deterrence in place post Balakot and the post that situation. And how you see, and that is why this is where this is cost effective as well for Pakistan, because Pakistan cannot afford to have as big a conventional army to match Indian force or deter India conventionally. That is why the nuclear weapons have played that role of deterrence and have stopped India from taking that aggression. And why it was important for Pakistan to respond to Balakot the way it did, had it not been, because you see, it started with this 2016, when India, on the pretext of an attack, without having proof that whether it has its origin in Pakistan or not, India, had that surgical strike, and the same was repeated during the Balakot in the Balakot situation. And had Pakistan not responded the way it did, it would have probably created that new normal that India was trying to create. But Pakistan's response, which was actually based on what had been our policy all along, because Pakistan had been, practicing those military exercises which were based on the conventional response initially. So that was a miscalculation on India's part, because they thought that probably Pakistan would not respond the way it did. But I think Pakistan had scuttled that kind of a situation which was misperception that perhaps existed somewhere, that Pakistan would not respond conventionally, and it would be difficult for Pakistan to respond to a smaller attack with nuclear weapons. So that confusion, I think, has been put to rest post Balakot. And so that's precisely, I think, is the answer. Nuclear weapons do the trick in this case. Ali, you can elaborate probably on that.
Thank you, Sitara, and thank you for the question, Mr. Kashif. But before that, just allow me to just add to what Ali said about SLCM. Look, every other system or missile has to be seen not through its sole contribution. It has to be seen in terms of its ability to add towards the totality of Pakistan's deterrent or anybody else's deterrent. So even if we talk about tactical nuclear weapons on their own should not be assessed. They should be assessed in terms of how they add to Pakistan's overall instruments of deterrence that are already in place. Same goes for SLC. So when an Indian planner will look to attack Pakistan, it would assess Pakistan's response from the very beginning till the very end. This is what Glenn Snyder said in his 1961 classic, Deterrence and Defense, and it's available online, you can read. Now to the question posed by Kashif. Again, I would give a reference, one of the new deterrence, Bernard Rudy, he said in his 1975 book, Escalation in the Nuclear Option, he said that it would be unfair to conflate every skirmish with deterrence failure. As Dr. Adil at the very beginning pointed out, and Ali also, that nuclear weapons are not responsible for everything under the sun. They're not the panacea for everything under the sun. So unka ek limited role hai, and the limited role is that they deter. In case of Pakistan, they deter large-scale conventional conflicts and also also conflicts with nuclear undertones. So a nuclear deterrent cannot and should not be expected to deter violations on the LOC. That's not their job. Nuclear weapons cannot even deter airstrikes because that's not their job. Because an Air Force commander would, if he wants to attack, let's say, Murid, he knows the fact that Pakistan is not irrational a player to respond to that strike with a nuclear strike on Delhi. It does not sound credible. So what an Indian Air Force commander would look at would be Pakistan's conventional responses in the same domain. So this is why I would now go back to Balakot. Deterrence did not fail, and especially I need to say this loud and clear. So far, we are only theorizing about deterrence failure. Deterrence has never failed ever since nuclear weapons have come into the mix. And God forbid, if it does, it means that nuclear weapons will be used. So if you say that nuclear deterrence failed, it automatically points to the likelihood of nuclear use. So thankfully, this has not happened. So deterrence did not fail in Balakot. India used its long-held proclivity to test its limited war concept under a nuclear umbrella. And as Sitara rightly pointed out, had Pakistan not responded, that the red lines would have been pushed towards Pakistan, and India would have gotten more space to, play around, and it would have said, okay, this is an airstrike on Pakistani mainland is acceptable to Pakistan. So that's it. We have got a template. Let's continue attacking mainland Pakistan. So our response was not even tit for tat. Our response was below the tit for tat level, but the response was necessary because we had to show three things: responsibility, resolve, and restraint. But as Sitara points out, had we not responded, India would have been emboldened, and rightly so. And India would have said that this is the tolerance level of Pakistan, and mainland, pura Pakistan mainland mein aata hai. And it could have had a very destabilizing impact on strategic stability and deterrent stability going forward. I hope I've answered the question.
Great. Yes, Ms. Amna.
On the issue of the drone technology, it rightly pointed out that India is already collaborating with US and also collaborating with the Israel on the acquisition of drones, as well as the transfer of drone technology and the manufacturing of drones, military drones in India. So in addition to the BACA and COMCASA and all these agreements, I would recommend reading another report recently released by the US National Commission on Artificial Intelligence, and that report categorically suggested another alliance, a new type of new agreement with India for the cooperation for the military AI. So basically, building on the existing Quad framework, US is planning to center its Indo-Pacific strategy vis-a-vis emerging technologies and especially artificial intelligence around its relations with India. So this US-India new strategic alliance could be operationalized either under the existing agreements like COMCASA and BACA, or in the form of a new standalone agreement. So we have to follow this area as well. Regarding the impact of such collaboration on the military plans of Pakistan or the threat from the India, I will say that it will happen. India can use military drones for surgical strikes in future. So if you could recall in the post 9/11 era, when US was conducting the drone strikes in the tribal areas of Pakistan, there was a statement from the India that India can also do such strikes within Pakistan. So yes, it will, these kind of initiatives will improve ISR capabilities and the strike capabilities of India vis-a-vis Pakistan as well as China. And in future, we can say a kind of another episode like Balakot, but this time but at that time, instead of the fighter planes, we can expect a drone without a pilot. So this will change dynamics a lot, and especially it would be really dangerous if India will use the drone swarming technology, and in case of any mistake or there is a possibility of inadvertent escalation of the conflict between the two countries. That's all.
Okay, thank you. There are a couple of other questions, I think, but time is now running short. So just to have final concluding remarks, and I would just like to have brief statements from each one of you. What is the role of next generation of scholars in developing better understanding of the role of nuclear weapons in South Asia? One, how the next generation can play its role in bringing or normalizing relations in South Asia between India and Pakistan, or any associated thought about the future of South Asia. So these are just broad things. If you want to comment on that, 30 seconds each, please go ahead. So we start with Alizia, Ali Mustafa, and Amna, and then Sitara.
I think we have lived through all these crises. So I think there is a great deal of cogency in our voice, if we were to put it in a very credible and a very knowledgeable manner. So for us, we need to enhance our knowledge and then try to communicate. We have these options. All of us have interacted with Indian counterparts over the course of our careers, and this should continue. And this is something that we can build upon. But let's be very frank, we are not likely to alter the strategic environment in South Asia, which is rigged against peace. So that's what I have to say. But the future does not look promising, if I were to put it very mildly.
Ali Mustafa.
Thank you. On Ali Jafri's pessimistic note, I would also agree as well. There's nothing much that we can change as far as being scholars in our position as scholars, but I think we have the urgency, but we also have more time as compared to the generation that is at the twilight of their career. So we do have more time, but at the same time we have more of a burden on ours as well, that now that we are more aware of the dangers, and considering that the environment as being perceived is changing for the worse. So therefore, but then again, this also presents us opportunities as well. That now there's more space for us to think critically, but also creatively as well, to come up with novel solutions to these challenges. The final thought that I would leave you guys with is that I think when we're thinking about strategic stability, there is a tendency to look at strategic stability in a very narrow lens, but I think we deserve better. So in order to have, if we have a bigger goal to achieve, I think that's a better borderline. Yes, we'll fall short when we're analyzing it. We'll be like that, there isn't much strategic stability, but I think having more focus on political stability rather than simply narrow stability, of arms race stability, crisis stability, is a worthy goal to have. That's all from my side. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Amna.
Okay, I agree with both Ali, on the issue of this future of South Asia regarding the youth, role of the youth or the young generation. I would suggest that the older generation or the elder one should give more opportunity is to speak about the South Asian dynamics, because in my personal observation, like the debate regarding the strategic stability in South Asia and the options we have, that debate is very limited or the constrained. Like and the youth have a lot of different ideas. So I believe the elders should like create a space for the new ideas and new innovation to deal the security issues currently in South Asia. So that's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sitara.
Thank you for giving me the space for this last concluding remarks. I tend to concur with agree with what that pessimistic element that Ali had shared. But I would also like to add that you see, if we talk about the role of the younger generation, I think engagement and the critical thinking are the two key words that I think are important for the younger generation to play their role. And as Amna rightly pointed out, that engagement has to be two-way, because the youth tries to engage, but there are rather lesser opportunities from certain less platforms. But I see silver lining on the horizon, because this is my second engagement in a row where younger generation, I'm rather more young, what would you call, slightly senior than the younger generations, but this is a second opportunity in a row, and where really young minds have come together, and I see the promise in there. But I think Pakistan as a country has been under that microscopic scrutiny in a way, and our thought process has generated in a more rather critical way. But if you look at, because engagement has to be done with India, but India is more on the declining trajectory, which is unfortunate, which actually leaves lesser space for the youth from our side for a constructive debate to take place. If we see in Pakistan, probably there are more younger voices who are eager for talk about peace, but I think that space is shrinking very significantly on the Indian side. And that's I think the more unfortunate part. But I think whatever limited space we have for positive engagement, we must avail, we must keep on trying. And that's where I think things hopefully will turn around, I would say.
Thank you very much. Brilliant. Why I requested you to share your views in brief, because there are lots of students who attended today's webinar, and because you are young, each one of you is brilliant in your respective field, and that is why I invited you, and they can more readily associate themselves with you guys. And the advice that you all four of you gave, I think that is very useful. But let me also highlight, in this modern world, opportunities can be created. You have to be creative. I have several examples. I'll not go mentioning the names, but there's several people who have made their name. Ms. Sitara is one, Alizia and Ali Jafri and Ms. Amna. All of them, they came out through their hard work, through their ideas. They presented at various conferences, they wrote, and that is how people know them very well. So, but I generally agree, there are relatively less opportunities. So to bridge that gap, we also made certain contribution, a very humble contribution, that we launched that platform of Strategic Foresight for Asia that is launched from London. So we are hosting this webinar. It's jointly hosted by Air University and strafasia.com. Why I'm mentioning strafasia.com was that this forum was started with one purpose: to give voice to the young generation. So anyone can write in that, and it is published after certain editorial, and it is published from London, so it has a wider audience. So all those who think that their voice is not being heard, they have platform. If they think that local newspapers or the journals, they don't publish, we will give you a due consideration if you fit in certain criteria. So that I wanted to. I also wanted to just highlight that soon we would be offering internship opportunities from the platform of strafasia.com. that would be a learning opportunity. And those of you who want to join in, enroll into it, this would be a program, and some of the brilliant speakers that we would request, they would give lectures, and we will advertise that also. So I'll wind up now. Thank you very much, each one of you, all the participants, all the attendees who stayed there till the end. Thank you very much, and also especially to those who participated in the discussion by asking questions. So this is what the purpose of webinar is, to indulge into these discussions so that your thinking process that triggers. So from my side, now I'm logging off. Thank you very much, and take care. Allah Hafiz.